Today in our 2018 Chevrolet Equinox, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Roadmaster taillight wiring kit with bulbs, part number RM-155. So here's what our wiring is going to look like once we have it installed. It's going to provide us with a 4-pole flat to give us all of our lights when we're flat towing our Equinox down the road. It's going to give us our turn signals for the left and right, the brake lights, as well as our tail lights. It's going to completely bypass our vehicle's wiring system, so we're not going to have to worry about voiding out the manufacturer's warranty. It's going to be a completely standalone system that's going to wire from the front, and then we're going to have a couple bulbs that we're going to install inside of our taillight housing themselves. Since it is going to completely bypass our electrical system and we are going to be installing a new bulb inside the housing, we are going to have to drill a hole to get that bulb and socket in place. So you're going to want to double check to make sure that you have enough room on the back side of your taillight to get that new bulb and socket in place. Now the big benefit to that bulb and socket kit is the fact that we don't have to tap into our vehicle's wiring, because a lot of new vehicles do have extremely sensitive electrical systems, and this is going to take out any kind of guesswork of everything. We're just going to have to run our wire from the front, drill the holes in our tail lights, and install the bulb and socket in place. Not only is it going to alleviate tapping into our electrical system, but it's also going to solve that problem of having those big magnetic lights on the back of our vehicle, where everything's going to be self-contained and we're not going to have anything running on the outside, potentially scratching our car. And now that we've seen what they look like and gone over some of the features, let's show you how to get them installed. So we're going to need to take our 4-pole wiring here, and we're going to need to route it all the way to the back of the vehicle where the taillights are. Now we got a couple different options of how we're going to get there. We're going to leave a small loop in the engine bay here, and we're actually going to come around behind the battery and go down the firewall right behind our coolant tank here and drop it down. Just want to mention you want to stay away from any extreme heat sources or moving parts when you route this down or when you're going down the frame rail to the back of the vehicle. And if you're having trouble getting the wire down, whether you can't see or it's not going where you want it to go, the trick is if you can take a coat hanger or something that has some structure to it that you can feed it down underneath, but leave yourself a little bit up top, route that the way you want your wire to go. Then you can attach the end of your wire to that coat hanger, go underneath, and pull it through. I'm using an airline tube that I had laying around, but like I said, you can use a coat hanger or anything that's going to keep its structure when you start pushing and pulling on it. So I'm going to take a little bit of electrical tape to secure my connector to that airline tube so I won't lose it when I start pulling it through. We're just doing this to get this down to the bottom of the car in the way that we want it so that it doesn't get tangled up and it doesn't start routing and going over, twisting to a side that we don't want it to go to. So now we can go underneath, grab our airline tube, and start pulling everything through. So I had my airline drop down right here by my cross member and the subframe. So now I'm just going to reach up and start pulling it through. You may need to reach up and grab that connector, help guide it through some spots. If you went around any kind of lines or brackets or anything, just to make sure that it fits. And once you have it down, you're going to want to pull all the slack out. Make sure it didn't get knotted up. Now once you have all the slack pulled out, we're going to need to route this towards the back of the vehicle. And everybody's going to do it a little bit different, but like I said, you just want to stay away from any heat sources or any moving parts. So I'll go ahead and run this, and then I'll show you how I routed it. So I zip tied my wiring to some existing lines along the frame, and I started routing it towards the back. Went underneath this cover, attaching it to some existing wiring, went to the outside of my fuel tank, then I went up and over the rear axle and over the subframe, came down, went along the side of the frame rail here, zip tying it to the end of the bumper beam, and I actually went behind the bumper beam, attaching it to the hitch, then I have it coming out right here. So we're going to need to cut the 4-pole end off of our wiring because we're not going to be using it, and we're going to be wiring this into the bulbs. So we're just going to cut that off as close to the end as possible. Once we have the end cut off, actually going to take our wires and we're going to separate them all the way to the back of our bumper. And we're going to do that for all 4 of our wires. You just want to grab it, start pulling them apart. With our wires separated, we're going to need to get into our back hatch and remove our taillights. So if we come to our taillight, we're going to have 2 tabs. Those little plastic circles. We're going to grab a flathead screwdriver. You're going to want to come behind the tab and pop it out. Now that'll expose the fastener that's holding the taillight in place. And we're going to grab a T15 Torx bit and pull those fasteners out. And we'll repeat that for the other side as well. And when we go to remove our taillight, you're going to want to work it back and forth just a little bit. You don't want to pry too much towards the outside because there is some alignment pins towards the back here that we don't want to break. Just going to work it back and forth a little bit to break it loose, and then you're going to want to slide it straight back off that alignment pin in the back corner here. And when we come to our taillight, we're going to go ahead and twist the entire socket and bulb out, and then we're going to set the taillight aside for right now, and we'll do that for the passenger side as well. So we have our taillight out here, and we have our bulb and socket with the wirings attached. Now we're going to need to drill a hole so that we can put the bulb into our taillight housing. Now there's just a few things that you need to keep in mind when you are drilling the hole. First off, the bulb needs to land in the red section of the housing, and you're obviously going to have clearance from your other factory bulbs. Now you're going to want to drill into the flattest part of the taillight that you can, and once you have the bulb in place, you're going to need at least a minimum of a 1/4 inch of clearance between the bulb and the housing, because you don't want that bulb to melt the housing and get extremely hot. So we looked, and the best place that we found, if you look very closely on your taillight, you're going to see an oval mark right next to the large plug hole. If you go right in the middle there, there's going to be a little GM mark just to the right of it. If you go right in that oval mark, that'll be a good center point to make your hole. Now we're going to need to drill a 1-inch hole, and I'm going to be using a hole saw to make a nice, perfectly round hole. You're only going to get one shot at this, so make sure that you prepare and you got your spot marked out correctly, and take your time drilling. Now we can come back and vacuum up all the shavings. Now if you got a little bit of the plastic shavings that are inside the housing that you're having a little bit of trouble vacuuming out, what you can do is if you just blow into the hole, it should start moving the air around in there, and there's a few more holes that it can come out. But now that we have our hole cut, go ahead and test fit our bulb, make sure it fits properly. We can see that it fits in there. Now we can take a flathead screwdriver and start bending these tabs out just a little bit, so they kind of grab onto the edge of that housing and snap into place. You don't want to bend them out too far, just enough to where they're going to grab the edge of the housing so it'll hold it in place nicely. And then once you have them all bent out, we can take our bulb and push it into the housing. Now if you did bend them out a little bit too much, you just go around the edge, kind of poking them in until it presses in and it's nice and secure. Now that we have this taillight done, we're going to repeat that same process for our other taillight. Now that we have our sockets in place, we're going to need to seal up around the edge. So I'm going to take a little bit of silicone and go around the edge just with a small bead. You don't need a whole lot. We just want to go around the edge to make sure no moisture and water can get inside. This will also help hold it in place, even though those prongs are going to keep it nice and tight. Once you get a nice bead around one of them, we'll go ahead and do that for the other one as well. Now while our silicone's setting up, we need to get our wires up to where our taillights are so we can make our connections. So I'm going to take that same piece of airline tube that I had earlier. I'm going to feed it down between the body and the bumper area here. So so I can meet up with it down below and attach my wires and pull them up. Since we're working on the left side, we're going to grab our white, yellow, and brown wires, and we're going to attach it to our airline tube and start pulling them up. So we're going to find the end of our wires here. I'm going to grab some electrical tape and secure it to the end of the airline tube and start pulling it to the housing. Now I do want to mention that when you do pull them up, you want to make sure that the wires aren't touching the exhaust over here. So once you have them up, it's not a bad idea to go underneath and make sure everything's routed the way you want it. When we go to make our connections, our kit does come with some different size butt connectors for connecting our wires to the sockets themselves, but I'm going to be replacing these with some heat shrink butt connectors because it's going to provide a little bit better protection for the wires and hopefully prevent any kind of corrosion buildup. Now if you need some of these, you can pick these up on our website. The yellow ones are going to be part number DW05745-5. That's going to be for a pack of 5. And the blue ones are going to be DW05744-5 for a pack of 5 as well. I went in and reattached my taillight bulbs back into my taillight. That way I know how much room I'm going to need. And we're going to start with our socket kit. We're going to start with the red wire. So since we're using the red wire, we're going to grab the yellow wire that we started running. We're going to estimate about how much we need, which there's plenty of slack on both ends. So we're going to cut back the excess and strip back both ends of the yellow and the red wire. We can grab one of our blue butt connectors, put the wire into one end and crimp it down. Put the red wire into the other end and crimp it in place. Now if we move to our brown wire, we're going to be attaching it to the brown wire as well. So again, we're going to estimate about how much we need, cut back the excess, and strip back both ends. But this time, we're going to hold on to the excess of the brown wire. We're going to grab one of the yellow butt connectors, slide it onto the socket end, and crimp it into place. The reason why we needed to hold on to the excess wire of our brown wire is because we're going to double up. So we'll strip it back, and we're going to attach it to the wire that's coming up from underneath. So we can just twist our wires together, slide our yellow butt connector in place over both the wires, and crimp it down. Now the reason why we're doing that is because that excess length of wire, we're going to need to run this over to the passenger side because this is for our taillight signal, so both sides come on at the same time. So for right now, we're just going to put that wire aside and we're going to focus on the black wire, which is going to be attaching to the white wire coming from underneath. So again, estimate round about how much we need, cut it back, and we're going to do the same process for our white wire, doubling it up and running it over to the other side as well. So we're going to strip back all 3 ends of this wire. Now the wire does have a plastic coating on it, which may make it a little bit difficult to strip. We can grab another one of our yellow butt connectors, put our white wire in, crimp down one end, take the other end of our excess white wire. Since our white wire is a little bit thicker than all the other ones, I'm going to double it up on the black side instead of the side coming from underneath. It doesn't really matter where you double them up. You just want all 3 wires that are attached to each other. Just be a little bit easier to get inside that butt connector since the black wire is just a little bit smaller than the white one. Now I'm going to be using a heat gun to shrink down my connectors. Just want to mention, if you are using an open flame such as a torch or a lighter, you want to be extra careful not to burn the wires or the connector themselves. So we're going to drop our brown and white wire back down to the bumper and we're going to route it over to the passenger side. So if it's easier for you, go ahead and take that airline tube or whatever tool you were using to get them up and go ahead and attach it to it. Then we can start routing them back down. Just go the same path that we came up. And once we reach the bottom, we can start pulling it through. Now we can put our driver's side taillight back in place. Just want to line up that alignment tab on the corner there. And just push it straight back into place. And we're going to replace the two T15 Torx bits. So now that we have our white and brown wires back down at the bottom, we're going to meet up with our green wire, and we're going to take all three over to the passenger side and route them up to the taillight just like we did over here. Now we're going to go behind the bumper support here. I'm going to tie it to some factory wiring we have. You just want to stay as far away from the muffler as you can. We'll put a few zip ties along the way to make sure everything's nice and secure. We're going to pull all the slack out of the wires, and then we're going to remove it from the airline tube. We'll go ahead and grab our tail light and put it back in place just like we did on the other side. So now we have our tail light connected and we see how much slack we're going to need. We can take our wires, and on this side we're going to be connecting the green wire to the red wire. So we're going to do the same process just to estimate how much we need, cut it back, and get one of our butt connectors. Now for our brown, it's going to be the same process. We're just going to connect them together using the blue butt connectors. Now once we get to the ground, it's going to be a little bit different, and we're going to be using the yellow butt connectors. With our white wire, we are going to connect it to the black one. So we'll estimate how much we need. But again, we're going to hold on to the excess white wire, and we're going to strip back the end of it as well. So we're going to take our black and white excess wire, twist them together just like we did before, take one of our yellow butt connectors and crimp it in place. And take the other end of the white wire, put it into the butt connector and crimp that down as well. So we should have our black and white wire connected, and then we're going to have a loose white wire coming out the end of our butt connector. Now this is going to be where we attach our ground to some sheet metal. So we're going to, again, estimate about how much we need, give ourselves plenty of room to work with to take the tail light out, and still have some room to change the bulbs or anything that we may need. So I think right about here would be plenty of wire for that, so we can cut that back. We're going to strip back the end of it, and this time we're going to take the provided ring terminal in our kit and crimp it in place. So now we're going to take the provided self-tapping screw, and I'm going to be screwing it right into the sheet metal here using a 1/4-inch nut driver. Tuck your wires in, line out that tab, we can put the taillight back in place. With our wiring all hooked up, all we have to do is mount our 4-pole at the front of our vehicle. However, we're not going to be using this connector in our application. So if you do use the 4-pole, you have a spot on your base plate that you can mount it. We have several different brackets available on our website, no matter what kind of connector you have. So I got my tester hooked up to make sure my lights are working properly. And if I turn my taillights on, simulating my RV turning the taillights on, you can see they both come on. If I hit the left turn signal, we can see that comes on as well, and the right turn signal. Now just to make sure that the lights are going to work properly and to show you that they don't affect our factory lights at all, I'll go ahead and run the lights in the vehicle as well. So when we're driving down the road and we're not flat towing our Equinox, our taillights and headlights are going to work normally because we didn't use them at all and we just completely bypassed the electrical system. So as you can see, our taillights are going to come on like normal, as well as the turn signals and the brakes. And with our lighting in, we're ready to hook up to our motorhome and start our adventure. That'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster taillight wiring kit with bulbs, part number RM-155 on our 2018 Chevrolet Equinox.
Thanks for watching. Click the link in our description below to shop, learn more, or visit us at etrailer.com. And leave us a comment if you have any questions.